Nonfiction writing carries with it a problem that you don't really encounter in fiction, and that is, how do you properly tell the truth? Welcome back to the Young Writers Vlog. Today we're going to be talking about some of the ethical questions that come up when you're writing nonfiction. These are questions that come up for every nonfiction writer, though a creative nonfiction writer is going to answer them in a different way than a journalistic or historical nonfiction writer is going to answer them. These questions are really important to the nonfiction genre because this genre is based around truthfully telling the stories of things that really happened. And in that statement, there's two phrases I want to focus on: truthfully tell and really happened. It's not always easy to uncover the truth of what happened and be able to tell that truth without embellishment or without flaw. At the same time, it's very difficult to determine which things really happened, what things might have been embellished or misremembered, or what things simply are a matter of perspective or misinterpretation. This is why these ethical questions are so important for nonfiction writers, because your readers trust that what you're telling them is a real story, that it is something that really happened, and that you've done your due diligence to make sure that your facts are true. I'm going to be bringing up and talking about these questions, but it's important to note that in a lot of cases there's no clear answer here. If there were a clear answer, these wouldn't be ethical questions, they'd be guidelines to follow. It's up to you as a writer to be able to answer these questions. First, what perspective are you presenting? Every event that transpires has multiple interpretations and different perspectives and viewpoints as a result of different values and priorities that people have, and you have to be aware of all of these perspectives. When you tell a story, you don't necessarily have to tell all of the perspectives. Sometimes certain perspectives are more truthful than other perspectives, but this isn't always the case. When you have an event where there are conflicting interpretations on what really happened, you as a writer have to determine how you define what the truth is here. How do you determine who is telling the truth? How much of this person's story is truthful? When you present it, do you write about the fact that there's conflicting perspectives, or do you write from a perspective that this one is probably correct and this one is probably not? And no matter which direction you choose here, you have to be dedicated to telling the truth here. And if you can't really tell what the truth is, then it's your responsibility as a writer to mention that you don't know what the truth is, or to present in such a way that it's not seen as a truthful representation. This is also true for personal nonfiction such as memoirs. You have to be aware that your perspective isn't necessarily accurate and is almost never the whole truth. No matter how confident you are that this happened the way you think it did, you always need to dig deeper to make sure that your perspective isn't flawed. And you might be surprised to find that events that you thought were simple and clear-cut actually have a lot of nuance behind them. The second question you have to answer is which details to include and which you have to omit. Now, in every story you tell, you sometimes have to omit details, whether they're unimportant or irrelevant to the story you're trying to tell. Even if these are things that really happened, and to tell them would be telling the truth, sometimes it's better to leave them out. Or maybe these are events that on their own don't really amount to anything. They don't really have any resolution or direct influence on what you're trying to talk about. But where's the line here? What's the difference between omitting an unnecessary detail and omitting a crucial detail? What's the difference between simplifying the details to tell a better story and simplifying the details to a point where you're no longer honestly representing what happened? Again, there's no real answer here, but it's a question you have to constantly ask yourself when you're thinking about what to include and what not to include. You have to make sure that those details you're omitting are actually irrelevant and unimportant. The third question is, how do you deal with the small details? We as people often forget small details. What was I wearing that day? What did that person say exactly? Was this on a Tuesday or a Wednesday? How do you navigate storytelling when the small details are either completely unknown or extremely unreliable? When we put quotation marks in our story, we're implying that this person actually said that. But if you're writing about something, you often never know if they actually said that. You often have zero proof that demonstrates they said this exactly. How do you navigate these details? How do you communicate what happened and paint a scene if you can't rely on this basic information? So the answer to this question is going to vary a lot based on what your writing style is and who you're writing for. Writing for journalistic or reporting standards, you're not going to report on anything you don't know is absolutely true. But if you're writing narrative nonfiction, this question has become a lot more difficult because you have to find a way to represent these characters without ever being able to know how they talked or how they acted or how they dressed, and at best only having secondhand accounts on what they were really like. This is one of the common problems with narrative nonfiction, is that you're trying to tell people what really happened, even though that you can never really know what happened. So this requires some amount of imagination and deductive powers to make a best guess of how it really happened. And some writers have mixed opinions of this. There are some writers that think that you shouldn't tell things that you don't know for sure happened, and other writers believe that you're allowed to recreate these scenes to the best of your knowledge in order to convey the subjective truth of what happened. The way you answer these questions is going to vary a lot based on how much you actually know, how confident you are, and what kind of audience you're writing for. And it's important to remember that whatever answer you reach here, you must always be trying to represent the events honestly. So that's all the questions we have for this episode. There are a lot more ethical questions that come up with nonfiction, but they're a little bit more specific in scale. In a future video, I can cover those more specific and situational ethical questions. But for now, this will give you a good overview of the kind of questions you have to be asking when you do start writing nonfiction. And thanks for joining me for this episode. Have a good night and keep on writing.